The Project Colorado is back in the shop, and as you can see here, we are missing the steering rack. We'll walk over here and take a look at that. This thing's been clunking for some time, and we discovered that crack. However, the truck was still operating and driving just fine. We just heard a clunk occasionally when steering. So we picked up this new steering gear from the local dealership. We're gonna swap that in. We're gonna save these inner tie rod ends. It came with new outer tie rod ends, so we're gonna reuse the new ones with our peak sleeves. And then we're gonna save these ends as spares, and then possibly look into having this cleaned up and welded back together and maybe braced up somehow. But this seems to be a common issue on the new Bronco, and 74 Weld and I think Bronco Buster make billet steering gears for those vehicles, but nobody makes anything for the Colorado that we have found. So we'll get this thing put back in, get it aligned, and move on to our next upgrade. The new steering gear is in. It's got several connections. So you got the 2 big pin connector. This one right here is 8 or 10 pin. The one that's on the upside up here, you do not have to remove. That actually comes off with the rack and connects to itself. And then of course you've got the locker connector here that I need to push back all the way in. And then we've got the peak tie rod sleeves and the new tie rod ends back on. So the hardest part, in my opinion, of this job is up in here, and I'll try to get a picture of it. Right in that little spot, right in the back there, you can see the head of that bolt. It's an 11 millimeter, and that's the pinch bolt for the steering gear shaft. And it is very hard to reach, but it is all back together. We're gonna pop these skids back on and move on to the next project and move it over here to the alignment bay as well and check the alignment and get that fine-tuned. The next phase of our build includes installing this frame support here. As you can see, that boxed lower piece kind of bridges this little curve right here, but we've still got those 589 brackets on there. This part is also from 589 Fab. We've gone ahead and removed the shock, and we've removed this inner fender liner here. So what we're gonna do is just kind of test fit this and mark where we need to grind the edges to get a good weld. Now back here, that kind of goes underneath that. So to prevent us from having to remove this bracket, which holds on the diesel exhaust fluid tank and all that, we're just gonna trim that bracket just to where we can get in there beside this to weld that. To note also, we've also removed the bracket that held the parking brake cables on. That's that bracket right there. So another thing we did was we have the aftermarket tank skid from AEV Conversions, and it had a support bracket that came from here and then went up here to this. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna weld that piece on, finish it off, and then go back and either put a nutsert or weld a stud there for that bracket to fit back on and modify that to work correctly. So a few little modifications. If you have a gasoline model, I would recommend taking the tank out. We could take the tank out just to get a better weld up under here, but I was looking and I think we can get it okay, so we're gonna leave the tank in. This is a diesel model. Let's go around to the other side. We've already completed that because it was much easier. So let's take a look at that. I went a little too heavy with the spray paint, but anyway, it's kind of wrinkling up a little bit there. But we're gonna get a couple of coats on this, and as you can see here, it bridges that arc in the frame. So that one's done. We're just gonna put another couple of coats of paint on it, throw the shock and that inner fender liner back in, and call this side done. All right, now that we've got that support brace back on, you can see up here that it doesn't quite fit where it should. So we're gonna have to trim that down and make a new hole for it. We trimmed that bracket down and welded it back together, and then we'll snap it back in, and we just need to make a new hole up here, and then that bolt will pull that flange flat against the frame. Can't really see the frame plates now that the tires are back on, as well as the inner fender liners and the shocks. But the reason we did that was because we added the camper shell here to this truck. But before we even added that, before this truck even had the camper on it, the bed was actually contacting the cab. So you can see that dent right there. That was actually there before we installed that camper. And you can see here, we changed the back glass to where it was flush mounted to give it a little more clearance as well. So got those frame plates all finished up. We are ready to do the next little phase of this build, which is the dash mount here for a phone, as well as a charger. And then we're gonna have an iPad base here, and that's gonna go on top of the dash. You'll start by removing this trim piece, and what we used is just like a panel tool and got right here under the edge, and you can just slowly pull this back. It's got a bunch of clips on the back side of it here. You can see those around the perimeter. Just be careful when you pull this off, you apply some even pressure. That way you're not gonna crack or break anything. Okay, so here on the top of the dash, we set the panel up to where, just take it up here and drop it into place. And what you'll do is bolt it temporarily. Sorry. To those two bolts. And then you'll mark down in here the two holes for the support leg, which is this set of holes on, or this hole on each side here. So we've done that, and we've already drilled those holes. That's those two down there. I was exploring how this panel comes off to drill it easier, and you can tell here that I boogered it up a little bit there and right there, but fortunately it will be covered up by this panel. So don't make my mistake. All right, so now once we've got those holes drilled, we had these 4 perimeter bolts holding on the whole radio faceplate. So with those 4 bolts out, you have 2 connectors on the back side and then 1 on the bottom. So a total of 3 connectors for that screen. We're going to remove this plate via the 2 Phillips head screwdriver, or two Phillips head screws. And that support plate is going to go ahead and mount to this and get fully tightened. That way we can put the radio faceplate back on. All right, so we now have the back support plate bolted in, and don't forget you need to run in the corner of this a hole for if you have the charge wire. But these are a 5mm Allen, and then on the underside here you can see there we have a large fender washer and a 10mm, that's the size, 10mm nut. So we've got this wire here. Not really sure where we're going to hook that into the power of the truck, but we will go ahead and extend that just so we have enough room to put all of this back together, and then we can make a decision on where to hook that up once we find the right circuit. All right, so we soldered the wiring and brought it down here and tucked it. It's outside the side of the console right now, so just a couple of wires we had laying around that we could use for that. But we went ahead and reinstalled the radio faceplate and got the 4 7mm bolts in. And they say when you tighten these upper two to lift up on the bracket before you tighten them, just to give it the most height, I guess, so that trim can fit back in there. And then we've also got the two Phillips heads back in, and this is our charge port we installed on the top of the plate. So we'll go ahead and test fit this plate, and where the silver trim fits up here in the top, they recommend trimming out a little area right there. That way this trim will fit nice and flush back into the dash. All right, marked this trim piece and cut out a couple of square notches, and then that should just fit right back where it's supposed to. All right, so everything fits on nicely, and it fits the dash just like it was supposed to be there from the beginning. All right, we've got the power and ground to that USB charging port running back through the back of the dash here. This is the side of the console that we've taken off, and we have grounded that wire right here on the metal frame of the dash carrier there, and then ran the red wire back here to this connector here. Now, this is one thing that we've been meaning to do for a long time, and just decided that it would be a good idea to go ahead and do it while we're here. So before, there was a sticker right here warning you not to put keys or anything metal in that area because that's a wireless charging port for a phone. But my dad, since this is his truck, his phone is the 12 plus or 13 plus, whatever have you. So it's too big physically to even fit in here. And then I've got the standard size phone with just a OtterBox Defender case, and it won't fit in here either. So what I've done is I pulled the console piece off, disconnected that charger, and this is the connector for that charger that ran up under here and plugged in. So I removed that sticker so nobody has to worry about that anymore. This is disabled completely, and the purple wire has ignition only power. So now that we have that connected, I'll hop up here and hopefully you can see this when we turn the key on. You can see the little bezel lights up for that charger. And then if we turn the key off, those lights turn off. So that means now this charge port took place of this one. So the power requirements should be very similar, and the wiring should be sufficient, and it will use the fuse for whatever that wireless charger uses. So we'll get this thing all snapped back together. And yes, it is 12:32 a.m. Trying to get this done before our next trip, which is this weekend. So we're going to go ahead and secure this fastener, or secure this connector back in here, put the side of the console back on, get that radio back mounted to the side of the console, and this thing will be finished up. The last upgrade on this phase of the ZR2 diesel buildup is this little box here that, with the help of my good friend John, got fabricated up. So basically we used some 1/8" aluminum. I made a template and gave him the design, and what this does is it bolts to these bolts we originally had nutserts in for his old bed rack, and then the plate kind of goes around the clamp for the Go Fast camper, and that stores the ladder for the Go Fast camper. I can't get that out one-handed, but anyway, you get the gist. But we are ready for another trip. Stay tuned to the channel to check out the 2024 East Tennessee Overlanders winter trip.